What if I told you that every government, no matter how just or popular, contains the seeds of its own destruction? What if the very success that makes a system strong inevitably creates the conditions that will tear it down? Consider what happened in Nepal on September 8th. The government banned 26 social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, after Gen Z protesters used them to organize against corruption. Their main target was what they called Nepo kids, the children of politicians and powerful figures who inherited privileges they never earned. The government's response to silence these digital voices backfired spectacularly. Within days, Gen Z protesters defied police curfews, stormed parliament buildings, and set fire to government offices. More than 50 people died. The Prime Minister resigned. The very attempt to suppress youthful rebellion had accelerated it. And all of this within a day of revolution. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. It's not new. What we witnessed in Nepal isn't an anomaly of the digital age. It's the latest chapter in a pattern so consistent that the ancient Greek philosopher Plato mapped it over 2,000 years ago. Plato witnessed the rise and fall of Athens, birthplace of democracy, and discovered something that still sends chills down the spine of political theorists today. Every form of government, no matter how successful, eventually decays through predictable stages. The very things that make it strong, like honor, wealth, or freedom, become corrupted by the next generation, who see them not as achievements but as obstacles. From the streets of ancient Athens to the digital protests, we witness the same relentless pattern. The young rise against their rulers, only to become rulers themselves, only to face the next wave of rebellion from their own children. The historical examples are striking in their consistency. Ancient Athens saw elder statesmen who defeated Persia face young citizens questioning military policy and religious tradition. The American Revolution was led by colonists under 30. The 1960s counterculture movement challenged the World War II generation's institutions, only to become the establishment that Generation X would dismiss as materialistic, who were then criticized by millennials as cynical, who now face the digital uprising of Generation Z. Every rebellion creates a new order, but every new order will eventually be governed by people who didn't create it, don't fully understand it, and certainly didn't choose it. But why does this cycle never end? Why can't any generation, no matter how enlightened or progressive, create a system that their children won't eventually tear down? The answer lies buried in the deepest layers of human psychology, political philosophy, and the very architecture of civilization itself. And today, for the first time in history, we understand enough about this pattern to ask the ultimate question: can we finally break the cycle? Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. What if rebellion isn't a choice at all, but a biological imperative encoded in every young mind? Modern neuroscience reveals something extraordinary about the developing brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for risk assessment and long-term planning, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s. Meanwhile, the limbic system, which drives sensation-seeking and novelty, reaches peak activity during adolescence and early adulthood. But this isn't a design flaw. It's a compelling theory for understanding how nature may have created a quality control system for human civilization. While we can't know evolution's intent, the effect of this neurological mismatch is that each generation is wired to challenge the last. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. A species that never questioned its current survival strategies would be doomed the moment environmental conditions changed. The restless energy of youth isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It may be evolution's way of ensuring the species remains adaptable to changing circumstances. Recent neuroscientific research reveals something even more striking. The adolescent brain shows heightened activity in regions associated with fairness detection. Young people literally experience injustice more intensely than adults. What older generations dismiss as naive idealism may actually be a biological amplification of moral sensitivity, exactly what you'd want in a system designed to identify when current arrangements have become inadequate. Consider Greta Thunberg, who at age 15 began her climate protests. To many adults, this seemed like simple defiance. But from this evolutionary lens, Thunberg's brain was doing exactly what young brains may be designed to do, detecting long-term threats that established systems are failing to address. Her rebellion wasn't teenage angst. It was potentially the species' survival mechanism in action. But biology alone doesn't explain the full pattern. For that, we need to return to Plato's deeper insights about power itself. Plato identified the crucial moment when generational overthrow becomes inevitable, when mutual respect between generations dissolves. He wrote, "The father gets accustomed to descend to the level of his sons, and the son to be on a level with his father. The father fears his sons, and the sons show no fear or respect for their parents." Notice that Plato blames both generations equally, the father who abandons his authority, and the son who refuses to acknowledge any wisdom and experience. This breakdown creates what Plato called the democratic soul, a person who treats all opinions and all authorities as equally valid. At first, this seems liberating, but when everything is equally valid, nothing is truly valuable. When all authorities are equally questionable, chaos becomes the only remaining authority. One could argue that periods of great stability, the Pax Romana, the post-World War II consensus, show this cycle can be paused. But even these periods merely stored up latent rebellion that would eventually express itself once the stabilizing pressure was removed. The rise of Christianity that transformed Rome, the revolutions of 1968 that shattered post-war complacency. Now, something unprecedented is happening. The cycle accelerates to the point where generational conflict spans years, not decades. Digital technology creates micro-generations with distinct identities separated by just a few birth years. Plato warned of this phenomenon in his analysis of democracy's final stages. When the minds of the people are filled with the spirit of lawlessness, they become sensitive to the slightest application of authority and cannot bear the slightest suggestion of slavery. He observed that as freedom increases, tolerance for any constraint decreases exponentially, creating what psychologists now recognize as reactance theory. Modern psychology confirms Plato's insight through reactance theory. When people perceive their freedom as threatened, they experience intense psychological pressure to restore that freedom, often by rebelling against the very source of constraint. Digital platforms amplify this by making every micro-authority visible and immediately challengeable. Look at TikTok's rise. Gen Z didn't reject Facebook for technical reasons. They rejected it because it became associated with parental oversight, precisely what Plato described as the democratic soul's intolerance for even benign authority. Within years, TikTok's format made longer-form platforms feel as outdated as newspapers. But here's the twist that Plato would have recognized. TikTok users born in 2005 now see users born in 2010 as fundamentally different. The democratic appetite for novelty has become so refined that generational overthrow now happens within a single high school experience. Plato identified the psychological mechanism behind this acceleration. The democratic soul lives from day to day indulging the appetite of the hour. What he observed as a character flaw, modern psychology recognizes as present bias, the cognitive tendency to overweight immediate rewards against long-term consequences. Digital platforms exploit this bias by designing for instant gratification, making the patient accumulation of wisdom feel not just slow, but irrelevant. This creates what Plato called the tyranny of the moment, when the velocity of change exceeds the time required to understand consequences. Ideas now spread at the speed of light, but wisdom still accumulates at the speed of experience. This unprecedented gap explains why digital natives can overthrow entire industries before traditional leaders comprehend what's happening. Here's the pattern so consistent it seems scripted. Rulers always underestimate the generation that overthrows them. Always. Plato identified the precise psychological mechanism behind this blindness. Those who speak uncomfortable truths face hostility from those whose power depends on maintaining illusions. But Plato went deeper, revealing why truth-telling becomes impossible for those in power. In the Republic, he describes the noble lie, the necessary fiction that every ruling class tells itself to justify its authority. What begins as conscious strategy gradually becomes unconscious belief. The rulers forget they're lying, especially to themselves. Modern psychology has mapped this process precisely. It's called motivated reasoning, the unconscious tendency to process information in ways that support conclusions we're motivated to reach. When combined with confirmation bias, our tendency to seek information that confirms existing beliefs, it creates what Plato recognized as the inevitable blindness of power. Consider Plato's allegory of the cave, but applied to generational conflict. The rulers are the prisoners who mistake shadows on the wall for reality. Their shadows are the systems they've mastered, the expertise they've accumulated, the networks they've built. These feel so real, so permanent, so obviously valuable that they cannot imagine anyone questioning them. As Socrates declared in Plato's Apology, the unexamined life is not worth living. The rulers stop examining their lives because examination threatens the very foundations of their authority. What psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs, makes self-examination literally painful for those whose identity depends on being right. The young, unburdened by invested expertise, see the shadows for what they are. They're the philosophers emerging from the cave, trying to tell the prisoners that their reality is constructed. And like Plato's allegory predicted, the prisoner's reaction isn't gratitude, it's rage. Plato observed that each generation of rulers makes the same fatal error. They fancy that they are very wise, but the effect of this is to make them really ignorant. Success itself becomes a form of blindness because it stops the psychological process of questioning that wisdom requires. The tragedy deepens through what Plato called the corrupted soul, the revolutionary who becomes the tyrant. The rebels of one generation inevitably become the rulers who misunderstand the next generation's rebels. Revolutionary consciousness cannot be maintained because, as Plato noted, power corrupts the soul that wields it. This isn't moral corruption, it's cognitive corruption. The neurological changes that come with success and authority literally rewire the brain away from the questioning, flexible thinking that made revolution possible. The real challenge isn't stopping rebellion, it's creating institutions worthy of loyalty rather than demanding it. Plato believed this was possible, but only through what he called the philosopher king, a ruler who understood the corrupting nature of power and designed systems to counteract it. In the Laws, Plato proposed something revolutionary. The law is the master of the government, and the government is its slave. Rather than seeking perfect rulers, he shifted the focus to creating perfect constraints on imperfect rulers. Modern psychology confirms this instinct. Better systems matter more than better individuals. Plato also anticipated what psychologists now call system justification theory, our tendency to defend the very systems that harm us. His answer was institutional wisdom, building questioning into the system itself rather than hoping individuals would do it. That's why he emphasized dialectic, truth-seeking through reasoned opposition. Modern studies echo this in devil's advocate research. Groups make better decisions when someone is formally tasked with challenging the consensus. Finland's education system embodies this principle. Teachers are trained to welcome student challenges, turning authority into a servant of wisdom, rather than a master over it. But Plato also knew small-scale models weren't enough. For larger societies, he imagined mixed government, institutions that balance competing interests against each other. He warned that laws must be living documents, not dead wisdom. Mechanisms like sunset clauses, which force periodic re-examination of laws, embody this principle by preventing societies from getting trapped in outdated rules. He also believed in a kind of guardian class, citizens tasked with questioning existing arrangements. Today, youth councils, or even lowering the voting age can serve this function, giving younger generations a legitimate voice before their frustrations erupt into revolt. And perhaps most forward-looking of all was his idea of the divided line, that different kinds of truth require different methods of reaching it. Routine governance might be left to representatives, but complex moral questions require public deliberation. In today's world, experiments in citizen assemblies and digital direct democracy echo this insight, allowing ordinary people to practice the dialectical reasoning Plato saw as essential. The larger pattern is clear. Systems that endure across generations don't cling to fixed answers. They institutionalize questioning, build in renewal, and guard against their own decay. As Plato warned, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not only against external enemies, but against the slow rot of self-serving bureaucracy. Rebellion is eternal because renewal is eternal, but Plato identified something profound about this cycle. The only constant is change itself. What we interpret as generational conflict may actually be the universe's way of ensuring continuous adaptation through what he called the Great Wheel of Becoming. Plato's Timaeus describes reality as fundamentally dynamic, a constant process of creation and recreation rather than a static state to be preserved. From this perspective, the young don't rebel because they're ungrateful. They're participating in the cosmic process of renewal that Plato saw as the fundamental nature of existence itself. But here's Plato's crucial insight. This process can be either conscious or unconscious, creative or destructive. In the Phaedrus, he describes two types of madness: the destructive madness that tears down without building anything better, and the divine madness that creates new forms of beauty and truth. Generational rebellion can embody either type. Modern psychology confirms Plato's distinction through post-traumatic growth theory, research showing that crisis can either destroy or transform, depending on how it's processed. Communities that frame generational conflict as an opportunity for conscious evolution create systems that actually grow stronger through stress rather than being weakened by it. Plato believed the key was what he called philosophical education, not just teaching facts, but teaching the process of thinking itself. The aim of education is to teach us rather how to think than what to think. This creates minds capable of what he termed dialectical reasoning, the ability to hold opposing viewpoints simultaneously and synthesize them into higher truths. Every generation inherits massive debts they never agreed to take on: climate change they didn't cause, economic inequality they didn't create, political systems they didn't design. From their perspective, the current world represents what Plato called the shadow world, a degraded copy of what reality could become. But understanding this pattern creates an unprecedented opportunity. Plato argued in the Meno that all learning is actually remembering, recovering eternal truths that the soul already knows but has forgotten. For the first time in history, we have enough data to remember the pattern clearly while living through it. We can identify the psychological and social mechanisms driving generational conflict, and use that knowledge to participate consciously in what Plato saw as the eternal process of becoming. The choice isn't between preserving the status quo or embracing chaos. That's the false choice Plato warned against in his critique of both oligarchy and pure democracy. The real choice is between what he called noble art and base art, between creation that serves the good and creation that serves only itself. Plato's allegory of the cave points toward the ultimate insight. We are all prisoners, mistaking shadows for reality, but some prisoners can be educated to become philosophers who return to help others escape. The intergenerational cycle isn't a prison. It's a classroom where each generation teaches the next how to see more clearly. As we near the end, hear this. You're not outside the cycle. You're living it. Whether you're a ruler clinging to hard-earned wisdom, or a rebel shouting that the system is broken, you're playing a part in the eternal return, the cosmic pattern that repeats until consciousness breaks it. We see this playing out dramatically across South Asia, where Gen Z movements have toppled governments in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, while sparking massive protests in Pakistan and India. These young revolutionaries understand digital organizing in ways their elders never could, yet they'll soon face the same challenge every successful rebellion confronts: governing systems they once sought to destroy. Both the fallen leaders and rising revolutionaries are caught in the same eternal pattern, one generation's wisdom becoming the next generation's oppression. The fundamental question becomes deeply personal. Am I living in the world of shadows or the world of truth? In generational conflict, this becomes, am I defending systems because they serve the greater good or because they serve me? Am I challenging systems because they're unjust or because they limit my freedom? Which part of the cycle are you perpetuating? For those who hold authority as parents, teachers, managers, elected officials, or simply people with experience, the challenge is stark. It is better to suffer injustice than to commit it. Are you using your authority to serve wisdom, or are you using wisdom to serve your authority? What are you doing to make your power worthy of respect rather than simply demanding it? The concept of the philosopher king wasn't about finding perfect rulers. It was about creating rulers so aware of their own imperfection that they constantly questioned their right to rule. The greatest penalty for declining to rule is to be ruled by someone inferior to yourself. The responsibility of authority is not just to rule well, but to prepare others to rule better. For those questioning established systems, whether you're 15 or 50, the question is equally challenging. Are you committed to justice itself, or only to justice as it serves your interests? How are you building institutions that your own children won't need to burn down? Are you creating something better, or are you simply tearing down what exists without considering the transcendent standard that should guide all human action? And for everyone, what inherited truth have you not questioned lately? What assumption from your own generation's rebellion have you allowed to calcify into false wisdom, the dangerous certainty that comes from never examining your most fundamental beliefs? Philosophy, literally love of wisdom, offers humanity's highest calling precisely because it provides a path beyond the destructive cycle of unconscious rebellion and reaction. Wonder is the beginning of wisdom. The capacity to look at familiar systems with fresh eyes, to question what seems obviously true, to remain curious rather than certain. This transforms generational conflict from a destructive force into a creative one. The eternal dance between generations will continue, but there's a possibility that had never existed before. The chance to dance consciously, with creative frenzy that builds rather than destroys, that serves truth rather than serving itself. Every heart sings a song, incomplete until another heart whispers back. Those who wish to sing always find a song. The question isn't whether the cycle will continue, it's whether we'll participate in it as unconscious prisoners or as conscious philosophers, whether we'll perpetuate the shadows or help each other see the light. The cycle is eternal. The question isn't how to stop it, but what we build in the space between the fire of rebellion and the rigidity of rule. What kind of bridge will you be? This was Philosophy Coded. If this video gave you something to think about, don't let the cycle stop here. Share it so more people question the world they live in. Comment below. Which part of the cycle do you think you're in right now? And tell me this. If you could give one piece of advice to the next generation, what would it be? Do you see the Gen Z protests as the beginning of real change, or just another turn of the same old cycle?